Welcome to the Power of Peacefulness podcast. We're all about bringing peace into your life. If you like this podcast, do me a favor, give it a thumbs up. And if you need some extra help, go ahead and download my free resource. You can find that at SharonMcLaughlinMD/workbook. It's a workbook all about peacefulness. So if you need some peace in your life, try the workbook. All right, let's get started. Hey everybody, today we have Dr. Brittany Chidley with us. She's a clinical psychologist, marital and family therapist. She's also been in the mental health field for over 2 decades and is the director of Trails Therapy. She's the founder of We Feel platform and also has resources about emotional wellness that we're going to be talking about. So today the topic will be emotional well-being and emotions, the importance of tuning into our feelings. Brittany, I appreciate you coming on here and sharing your expertise.
Oh, my pleasure, Sharon. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here and very excited and passionate about this topic.
So let's talk about emotions versus feelings. Could you just tell us? Because to me, they're kind of the same. But when you wrote that and we were talking about this before the podcast started, I was like, no, this is definitely something we need to speak about.
Sure. So this might just be, kind of nitpicky, but in terms of research, when we're researching emotion versus feeling, it can be helpful to differentiate the two. We can look at emotion as more of an unconscious firing of your body. So if you're, sitting in your office and someone comes banging on the door, your body might fire, a fear response. And so how we make sense of that would be our feeling. And so if we're feeling like the emotion is what's being fired, the electrical activity in our body, and the feeling is how we specify, right? Like feeling scared, feeling angry that someone, interrupted my meeting, or feeling scared because it's never happened before. So really the feeling is our perception.
I love it. Thank you for clarifying that.
Mm-hmm.
So tuning into our emotions, what advice would you, look, we're talking about overreactive people here, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're overreactive. They realize they're overreactive and they want to change. They want to make some changes. So
Mm-hmm.
what advice would you give to them?
So Sharon, in some ways we're talking about everyone, right?
Yeah.
Like everyone has emotions. And in terms of the regulation component, as a psychologist, I do see a lot of folks who don't know how they're feeling or struggle with regulating their feelings. So I had referenced some research earlier about Mark Brackett. And so he's a Yale psychologist who has come up with this ruler approach. And that breaks down ways that we can cope with intense emotion by recognizing, that the R is recognizing the feeling and to understanding where it might be coming from. And L is labeling it. And so what sometimes we look at genders, like what men may perceive as anger, women may perceive as fear. And so labeling your emotion, and then in terms of explaining and elaborating on the feeling and seeking some understanding for that. And then the last one, in terms of R, like you had referenced, regulating. How are we going to regulate the feeling? And so how we regulate joy is different than how we regulate, distress or anger, right?
Love that. People, well, we had talked about, you wrote here, we often get stuck trying to get out of our emotions or change them, and that sometimes can result in us feeling worse. Can we talk a little about that?
Absolutely. I see this daily within my practice, right? That most people don't seek out a psychologist because they're feeling wonderful and want to share that. There's something going on, there's something problematic, and they want to feel better. And so sometimes there's situations outside of us that we can't change, right? And there's trauma, there's grief, there are certain things that we can't change. And when we can understand our feelings and choose how to cope or what our coping skills might be, that allows us to metabolize our emotional well-being in more digestible parts.
Talk a little about coping. This is general information, there's nothing specific. We do have to make that disclosure.
Mhm.
For some people that have a hard time regulating or have a hard time coping, what are some tips that you suggest?
There's lots of different tips, and coping is a really big area. That's a common treatment goal, right? Increasing coping skills. And so I think very broadly recommend connecting, whether that's to oneself, right? Taking a moment, connecting to what's going on, or to someone else. And so that might be a provider, it might be a family member, a friend, your social network, but connecting either to yourself or to someone else, building connection is a very big coping skill we work on. Another one is understanding some triggers, understanding environments, understanding your body and yourself. Those, building some insight and better understanding is also a big part of the work.
And then we had also spoken about the significance of our feelings in work and life.
Mhm.
Where does this play in?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess we can use our feelings, right, as clues and helpful data throughout our day to day, throughout our years. And sometimes, many times, we have emotions that we don't understand, that we don't like. And then we have feelings that we enjoy more than others. And using those as clues and helpful data, just like you would a physical ailment, that if you have a headache or a stomach ache, you tune into it. And that's a clue. And then you decide what are your options at that point. And sometimes we make the mistake of assuming that our feelings are facts. And if we feel rejected by someone, that it's factual, they don't like us. And that's a common mistake. Another mistake we make is assuming that our feelings are permanent. And what I know after over 2 decades in the mental health field is that there might be, a continual feeling we come to, but no feeling is permanent. And so that sense of understanding the feeling on our day to day and building awareness. I mean, how many times do you ask someone how they're doing and the common response is fine? We generally don't share, much about how we're really doing.
For people who have feelings that they don't like, what are some suggestions there that could help them?
Mm-hmm. So we all have feelings that we don't like. And I think normalizing and recognizing just I don't like this feeling and giving that more space. I think your question of we have the feelings and how it could leave us feeling worse when we try to fight the feeling away is recognizing I don't feel well. And I can acknowledge that I'm not spending extra energy fighting that discomfort away, which many times leaves us feeling worse. Right now, we've exerted a lot of emotional energy when we weren't feeling so well to begin with. And we've kind of dug, further into a hole, or like using your computer on something when you don't have a lot of battery left, and now you have no battery left. So seeing what your feelings are and creating some space and recognizing it is something that I frequently recommend.
Brittany, this podcast is the power of peacefulness. So,
Mm.
for the women who are listening out there, they want to create more peacefulness in their lives. What tips would you give them?
Peace is one of my favorite feelings, and it doesn't mean, right, the absence of distress. It's, in a sense, finding some way to settle or ground yourself in the midst of the distress. And I loved your last podcast with Anxiety for Physicians of finding a way to ground yourself by putting your hand on your heart, taking a deep breath, and using that space of right now I'm okay. I think your last host referenced the statement of, well, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
And changing that question to, well, what's right with me right now? I really like that. What can we connect with right now? Where is peace in us, in our environment? And again, that's not permanent either. But if we can find a glimmer of it, it can certainly keep us going.
That was Dr. Jeannie Lawrence who said that. And yeah, that actually stuck with me as well. It really did.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wow, so powerful. Of course, we always concentrate on the negative, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what's wrong with me? Rather than looking at like, how many things am I doing right or what's right with me?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of finding peace, I think we talked about the difference with emotion versus feeling. And so recognizing that there's some emotional response, labeling what the feeling might be, and coming up with a way to care for that feeling can leave us feel like we have found more peace than if we feel helpless or hopeless that we can't take care of that feeling.
So, Brittany, we recognize feelings, right? A patient comes to you, they want to know what to do with these feelings. What do they
Mm-hmm.
do?
Great question, Sharon. And so I came up with three C's. One is curiosity. It's very similar to what Mark Brackett has put out there, but one is curiosity. You notice maybe an increased heart rate, maybe a tone change in your voice or your body posture has changed. Being curious and, like you had referenced, tuning in. What's going on? My partner just raised their voice, or I'm stuck in traffic and I notice my heart rate increases. So being curious is different than judging it, right? Two, categorize it. And the categories differ, right? It might be a continual lull or low mood. And that might be something that we notice is continual and we want to follow up with our physician or providers with. The other is maybe things are chaotic, a busy work schedule, a day that just had a lot packed into it. And you notice you're maybe low on energy or you're struggling and you're feeling more fatigued. And so this feels more chaotic to your environment. And then the third is this a crisis? And so we want to look at, is it continual? Is it chaotic? Or is this a true crisis? And we need immediate service right then and there. But many times we have that, emotional response. We don't know the feeling and we jump to crisis mode when it's not really a crisis. And so all modalities of talk therapy really, have an underlying thread of feelings in their work. And so that sense of curiosity and categorizing, and lastly, coming up with a care plan. What's your next step? How can you care for that feeling?
How do people get a hold of you if they want to work with you?
So I've started the platform where you found me, and We Feel. And this is more of a community to normalize talking about our feelings and to show the strength it takes to see inside ourselves and others, how they're feeling. And We Feel I have on Instagram and I have a website. And the hope is to continue to build this platform that offers free resources to the community about our emotional well-being and our feelings.
You also have some resources on your website. You have a card deck and also some worksheets. Tell us about that.
So from Instagram, I've gotten some feedback of how do I talk about disappointment? Or how do I share that I'm angry in a way that others can hear me? So there are some worksheets on there that, you can break down and get a little bit more comfortable talking about your feelings with some tips. Of course, it's not a substitute for mental health treatment or therapy. And then the card deck is a list of a whole bunch of different emotional language and some coping skills that might match.
Brittany, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom with us. And what I got out of this conversation is really just be in tune to our feelings, which we're so used to go, go, go.
Mm.
And then we react because we're tired. We haven't taken care of ourselves. I'm a big pusher in self-care. It
Mhm,
starts there with ourselves.
mhm,
Listen to what Dr. Chidley is saying. it's important just to tune into ourselves and our feelings. And then everything else has to come second after that. But we have to be in tune to ourselves before we can even try to figure out other people. I think so many of us question, why did he say that? It always brings it back to, well, why is this even important to you, regardless of what they said? What's triggering you to start this?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Sharon. It's been a pleasure meeting you and talking with you as well.
Bye, Brittany.